Inclusion consists of placing disabled or learning impaired students in general education classrooms. Generally, the debate about including students in a mainstream classroom centers around two main types of students: those with disabilities and those who learn at accelerated paces. Both groups need instruction presented at different speeds and levels in order to learn. We have decided to focus on learners with special needs.
Starting in the 1900s began the policy of compulsory public education in the United States. Special education classes did not exist, however they were later developed for students who couldn't meet standards. As research progressed in the early 1900s, the debate about the success of ability grouping was rekindled. By the 1950s, special education programs were available in many districts. Then, in 1964, the Civil Rights Amendment was passed. Although it dealt mainly with equal education opportunities for students of color, it affected all facets of multicultural education, including students with special needs and gifted students. In the early 1970s, several landmark civil rights laws were passed, giving special needs students the right to a free public education. This guaranteed that the students could participate in a full range of school activities. Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, or IDEA, was passed in 1997 in support of inclusion. It called for the special and general education teachers to work together to create an individualized education plan for the benefit of every student with a disability. In 2002, the No Child Left Behind Act was passed. It led the way for most special needs children to be moved out of their special education classrooms into the mainstream classroom.
According to the U.S. Department of Education in 2009, 12% of students have a disability. 88% of students with disabilities are included in a mainstream classroom. 70% of students with a disability have more than one disability. 47% of students with a severe disability were included in a mainstream classroom. All students, both traditional learners and special needs, are affected by inclusion. After more than 10 years of implementation, inclusion has not fully met its promise. It is sometimes recommended without prioritizing the needs of individual students. Is inclusion a good choice? In theory, yes, but in all actuality, no.
If the teacher does not have an appropriate attitude about inclusion, it will invariably fail. Often teachers do not have a good understanding of students' disabilities, resulting in students feeling ostracized and left out. Inclusion may be the most politically correct teaching strategy, but we firmly believe that each student's individual needs should be our first priority as future educators. Placing students with disabilities in a general education setting is not in the child's best interest when the classroom is not set up to meet their needs. This belief is supported by many in the field of education. For example, Phil Hatlin, superintendent for the Texas School for the Blind and Visually Impaired, does not support inclusion because it is a, quote, one-size-fits-all approach, end quote. To further understand this issue, we spent some time in discussion with Pam Cunningham, who directs an inclusion program for kindergartners with autism.
Hi, my name is Pam Cunningham. I'm a special ed teacher. I provide general ed support for children with autism. I have 8 kindergarten students, and we go with them I have 2 teaching assistants. We go with them into the general ed classroom to provide academic, social, emotional, and behavior support. It's not politically correct, and research may not support it, but in actual practice, my children do better in a small group. I find that when we are in a small group, I can focus on their individual needs, I can minimize the distractions, and we can get more done with differentiated instruction than we can in the larger classroom. In addition, the general ed teacher says that she gets more accomplished when my children are not there taking up a large amount of her attention, and they get more accomplished. So even though it's not really the politically correct thing to say, in actual practice, it seems to work best to have my children not in a general classroom.
In multicultural education, it is important that both the learning style of the students and teaching style of the teacher are understood. Assumptions made by teachers about the issues of inclusion and representation in the curriculum can interfere with the ways in which cultural diversity is addressed and incorporated into teaching learning resources. The model minority stereotype has been associated with Asian Pacific American populations, which consequently has impacted teachers to assume that all Asian Pacific American students perceive school as affirming and inclusive, therefore throwing a cloak of invisibility into the curriculum and in teaching learning resources, denying the very presence of these children and youths in the learning environment.
The struggle surrounding inclusion has far-reaching implications in our society. When extra time is spent catering to students with special needs, higher achievers do not receive the attention necessary to maximize their learning potential. Because these students are the leaders of tomorrow's culture, it's critical that we take the necessary steps to prepare them for their futures.
Children! Is that okay? Do you have a question?
Grouping students by ability is a good alternative to inclusion.
Inclusion is not only hard on the students, but hard on the teacher.
I believe inclusion isn't always beneficial for the
I
student.
personally don't believe inclusion benefits all students in giving them the attention.
I believe inclusion is a great theory, but not necessarily what's always best for each individual student.
As a future educator, it's really intimidating the idea of teaching and meeting all the needs of my different students.